So now let's have a look at hand positions. So a guy named Graham Chapman, who was a quite reputable foil fencing master in Victorian Britain, and I've been reading through his manual recently. It's fascinating because he basically he sort of writes a manual the way I teach, where he just sort of starts talking and then occasionally pauses for breath. It's not that systematized, but his basic idea is that once you know the hand positions of foil, both for parry and for thrust, all you really need to learn is how to move between them, and you can learn what is otherwise generally a very, very complicated system of fencing fairly easily. And certainly if you look at a lot of foil manuals, they are quite complicated, certainly in terms of listing everything. Like if you get Alfred Hutton's The Swordsman, his section on foil takes up about half the manual. So there's foil, and then the other half of the manual is saber, bayonet, grappling, and some additional, like grappling with the sword, and some kind of additional drills and thoughts. Whereas Chapman's idea is basically, if you know the hand positions and you know the basic movements, you can kind of piece everything together yourself. And how much or how little you learn depends on what kind of fencer you are. All right. So we're going to start by coming on guard, and we're going to look at each of the hand positions as both a guard, a position to thrust from, but also a parry. So the first position is prime. These are numbered. Prime is my hand is held palm out like this, in line with the inside edge of my body. As some fencing terminology, basically if I hold my sword out, anything that comes along this side, basically comes, I get my arm or my back, like comes, here is coming outside the weapon. Anything that comes here is coming inside the weapon. And then basically at the level of, really the level of my guard. So just, mid-chest, we split between high and low. So my sword is protecting the high outside, high inside, low inside, low outside. Prime protects basically the low or sometimes high inside line. So I turn my hand over. My hand is now in line with the non-sword side of my body, the tip facing out. Actually, probably want my hand more along the center line, and my tip roughly in line with the non-sword side of my body, and that's prime. And, you can have it all the way up here if you're civilian hope and like to defend so much that you're not terribly worried about winning a fight so much as long as you can make it slowly lose. Or you can just have it here where it's a good sort of low inside parry. The next hand position is second. All I do with that is bring my hand and my blade over to in line with the outside edge of my body. And we're at second. And those of you who have been doing like the saber or the other weapons will notice some of these numberings, but hopefully they'll make sense after that. The next position is tierce. I try to remember to say it terse as in tertiary because these are numbers, but I think tierce because it's how it's phonetically. All I do with that is my hand comes up, my hand sits at 45 degrees on this angle. My hand is in line with the outside edge of my body. My tip sort of, on the center line or even across another edge of my body, depending on what I'm doing. And then the next hand position is cart or court. And all I do for that is bring my hand over so that it's 45 along this angle. My tip facing inwards, usually either on the center line or even across my body, depending on what I'm doing. From here, I move to quint. Where all I do is I turn my hand over flat. I keep it in the same position, in line with the inside edge of my body, but my tip is out over here because keeping in line is really uncomfortable. And this parry is generally done as a beat to kind of send my opponent's blade flying over here somewhere so I can stab them easily. And so this is quint. I then have sixth. All I do is my hand is sitting palm upwards in line with the outside edge of my body, the blade facing forward, so everything facing forward. That's a 6. Then for 7, I bring my hand down here to the low. This is a good parry for the low inside. My hand is facing up, my palm at this angle here. My tip relatively probably on the center line, maybe a bit further over. Like it varies a little bit. These hand positions are not exact, they're approximate. And the final one is octave. where I just bring my hand over. So my hand is palm up, facing out. This one can be a bit uncomfortable, particularly if you're kind of tight to the shoulders from sitting at a computer all day, like I might be, in line with the outside of my body. So those are the 8 hand positions. These are used as guards, as parries, and as thrusts. The difference between a guard and a parry is how high the tip is. So if I'm, say in a tierce guard, my tip is still relatively forward. It needs to point at my opponent. And this is going to be quite important for counterattacking, so I need to bring my tip online before I thrust. Whereas if I'm parrying, I want my tip higher so that my opponent can't skim over the top of it. So I parry, tierce, I sort of punch my sword out, I whip my tip up, so my opponent can't come over. And then before I return for a riposte in tierce, I come to guard and then thrust. So we're going to go through. So we're going to go through each of those positions as a parry, then a guard, and then we're going to do a thrust from them. And I'll move back a little bit so I don't stay on my camera. And then, yeah, I mean, the main thing is if you can follow along and try and remember the hand positions, that's good. I might switch weapons just so you can see my hand a little bit better. So I'm just going to switch to a stick, just so you can see what I'm doing. But yeah, just try and follow along. The main thing is that you get used to hand positions. It took me about 3 years to actually remember what they were. But after about a month or 2 of practice, I was able to do them like fairly reliably if I could see which hand position to work. So starting from that basic guard, we're just going to move to prime. So let's say, this medium extended guard, opponent comes in, tries to stab us on the low side. So what we'll do is turn our hand over, bring it, probably bring it in line with not, just inside of our center line, and bring our tip down. So our tip is sitting about that high to make sure our opponent doesn't skim out underneath. So from the guard position, prime. And something that actually helps you get to this position from a guard is you actually do a little circle with your tip. So go prime, like that. And then I want thrust. I'm just going to stay in prime because that's easy. So I come to a prime guard by moving my tip up and align with my opponent. So parry, guard, and then thrust. My arm is already extended in this guard. So thrust and back to guard. All right. So let's practice that a few times. So again, going to prime guard, so just draw a little circle with your tip. So tip just circles out to your weapon side and then comes back in as the hand turns over. So the last thing you want to do is do this, where you sweep your opponent's sword into you. So instead, draw a little circle with your tip and come to this position. All right. So prime, parried, and so we're going to riposte. So we come to a guard. Whenever you riposte, you come to a guard first. You can't riposte. It's very hard to riposte from a parry because what will tend to happen is you'll tend to cut with your tip, which for the thrusting weapon is not particularly useful. So you come forward, lunge, and retract, back to guard. So let's just do that. Let's just practice it a few times. So prime parry, guard, thrust, retract. Parry, circle tip, palm facing out, tip down, then a parry, guard, where a tip comes up and line, lunge, and retract to guard. So, parry, guard, lunge. Parry, guard, lunge. Parry, guard, lunge. Parry, guard, lunge. Show it from the side. So guard. So going circle tip. Parry, guard, lunge. Parry, guard, lunge. Parry, guard, lunge. Parry, guard, lunge. And once more for luck. Parry, guard, lunge. Right, so now we're going to look at the second hand position, which is second. These are numbered. And unlike, say, every other weapon we've done, the numbering system is purely French in this, so it doesn't get confusing as it does with all other late 19th century British weapons where they have French numbering for just the parries, or just the hand position parries, and then a different numbering for everything else. Right. So from guard to come to second, all I do is draw a little circle with my tip till my palm is out. Everything's in line with the outside of my body. My second parry. And part of that circle as well is it gives a bit of impetus to your to parry. So it's not just I'm drawing a circle to hit, to get to the position. I do this to basically swat my opponent's sword away as a way of kind of displace them to create an opening for my riposte. So same deal again with riposte. I basically bring my tip so it's in line, that's coming to guard, and then riposte. And because the guards of prime and second tend to be done with a very straight arm, you can do them like this, but it's really uncomfortable. You don't need to extend your arm first. With more retracted guard, you don't need to extend your arm. Right, so coming back to guard, circling my tip to parry, guard, thrust, and back to guard. So parry second, come to guard, thrust, and back to guard. Second, guard, thrust, and back to guard. Second, guard, thrust, and back to guard. Second, guard, thrust, and back to guard. Right. And just to show you that from the side, we're going to mine some default. I'm going to call this medium guard. Just please don't confuse it with the medium guard of saber or knife. You could theoretically do a medium guard with stick, but they don't. So, medium guard, come to parry second, second guard, thrust, back to guard, back to medium. So, parry second, second guard, thrust, and back to medium. Parry second, second guard, thrust, and back to medium. And once more for luck, parry second, second guard, thrust, and back to medium. Right. So moving through, we're now going to look at tierce. And because tierce and card are more retracted, one of the advantages of having extended arm is you can jerk your hand back, and this kind of gives a nice kind of impetus to your parry. So if in this medium guard, my opponent throws a thrust at me in the my high outside line, jerk my hand back, whip my tip up, and I want my hand to be in this sort of 45 position, in line, and my thumb basically in line with the edge of my body. Tierce. And then to return, line my tip up, my arm is still retracted, extend, thrust, and come back. And come to medium guard. So let's practice that a little bit. So from medium guard, turning our hand over, retracting it back, whipping our tip up to a nice tierce guard. Going to a tierce parry, tierce guard, extend and thrust, and back to guard. So a quick chat message. I'll just quickly pause to check it out. Sorry, I can't actually hear anyone without my earpiece in. Cool, so all good. Sorry, we had some problem with trolls coming in a little while back, so now I'm quite vigilant of what the chat messages say. So, let's practice 5 minutes of trolls and get back to it. So, medium guard, come to a tierce parry, tierce guard, extend and lunge, and back to medium. So just to show you that from the side, also should we follow along? Medium guard, tierce parry, tierce guard, thrust, and back to guard, tierce parry, tierce guard, thrust, and back to guard, tierce parry, tierce guard, thrust, and back to guard, tierce parry, tierce guard, thrust, and back to guard. Right, so let's move through the next, the next of hand positions. Make sure you shake your shoulder out between each section. Like I'm deliberately talking crap between each parry to give you a chance to rest your shoulder so you don't get too tired. But from our medium guard, we're going to go to cart. So all I do is I jerk my elbow back, I bring my hand over and my tip up, and this one's quite nice because it can be quite explosive. Now, if you've got a thrust coming in, you can hear this bang. So I'm at my cart parry. I drop down into my cart guard, I extend and thrust, and come back. So cart, turn my hand over, so it's with the hand position is 45 degrees along this angle. Turn my hand over, flip my tip up, bring my hand in line with the outside of my body. That's my parry. And now I want to riposte, so I come down to my guard, extend and lunge, and come back. So let's practice a bit. Cut parry, cut guard, thrust, and back to guard, back to medium. Cut parry, cut guard, thrust, and back to medium. Cut parry, cut guard, thrust, and back to medium. Cut parry, cut guard, thrust, and back to medium. All right, I'm just going to do that from the side. So whenever I use the stick, I always feel like doing sticky stuff. Just probably not great if I'm demonstrating a different weapon. All right. So medium guard, cut parry, cut guard, thrust, and back to guard. Cut parry, cut guard, thrust, and back to guard. Cut parry, cut guard, thrust, and back to guard. Cut parry, cut guard, thrust, and back to guard. All right. So now let's look at quint. So number 5, and I've had a few people ask me if quint is in sabre. The answer to that is no. In French sabre, where they do have the same hand positioning numbering method. Quint is a head guard, but as a hand position, it's here. In the British systems, they just refer to this as St. George or head guard. I think they the British are very, very aware of French foil. Basically, that's what you do in Britain, is you do French foil. Very few of them seem to have much of a concept of the French sabre system. I find that interesting. All right, so from our medium guard, I'm going to turn my hand over so my palm is down at kind of this 45, so along this angle. My tip is going to flick out quite far, because this is me flicking my opponent's sword out of the way to come to quint. And I'm going to extend. I actually like to extend my arms as I'm coming on guard with this, and take a brief pause. Don't fall into the trap of expelling and then trying to come online in one motion. Expel, come on guard, and thrust, and back to my medium. So it's coming through. Quint parry, quint guard, thrust, and back to guard, back to medium. Quint parry, quint guard, thrust, and back to medium. Quint parry, quint guard, thrust, and back to medium. Quint parry, quint guard, thrust, and back to medium. Quint parry, quint guard, thrust, and back to medium. Quint parry, quint guard, thrust, and back to medium. Now to show you that from the side. So, and now medium guard, go. Quint parry, quint guard, thrust, and back to medium. Quint parry, quint guard, thrust, and back to medium. Quint parry, quint guard, thrust, and back to medium. Quint parry, quint guard, thrust, and back to medium. All right, so let's look at sixth. Instantly with each of the guards, you can just come on guard in those. You don't have to come on guard in the medium. And so something Hutton basically says is that in foil, the medium guard is a teaching tool, But when you're actually foil fencing, or once you get kind of good at it, foil fencing, you're going to want to start in just definitive guard to close off a particular line. And I agree with that. Like, I find that, you know, the medium guard is a good teaching guard, but it doesn't really, as much as it doesn't stop you from doing anything, it also doesn't stop your opponent from doing anything. And fencing is a bit of a chess game where each move you do, you want to use to try and rob your opponent of two potential moves. So you sort of, you know, you commit to something to try and sort of cull down your opponent's options. All right, so from my medium guard, all I do becomes 6 is I bring my hand over flat. I bring it so that the pommel of my sword, stick, weapon is pointing straight at, straight at my shoulder. The parry tip can be kind of high, but it's still fairly flat. This is still fairly flat hand position because doing this is tremendously uncomfortable. Yeah, this is weird. Which is also what makes this a really, really good parry riposte. I don't actually have to move my tip very much, if at all, to come to the guard position to then thrust. And you see, like, the parry of 6 becomes very, very popular in the late 19th century. Supposedly the numbering of the hand positions in French starts with the position draw your sword to, and then moves through positions in order of utility, which is why septime and octave, which are quite uncomfortable, are the highest numbers. But by late 19th century, 6 is like the primary guard in parry. It's super useful. All right, so from a medium guard, parry of 6, hand over in line with my shoulder, hip kind up. 6 guard, not that it's a huge difference, but it's still good practice to make sure that you're on line. Thrust and back to guard. All right, so for medium, parry of 6, guard of 6, thrust and back to guard. Parry of 6, guard of 6, thrust and back to guard. Parry of 6, guard of 6, thrust and back to guard. Parry of 6, guard of 6, thrust and back to guard. Parry of 6, guard of 6, thrust and back to guard. I'll show you that from the side. And in guard, parry of 6, guard of 6, thrust and back to guard. Parry of 6, guard of 6, thrust and back to guard. Parry of 6, guard of 6, thrust and back to guard. Parry of 6, thrust, guard of 6, thrust and back to guard. Almost got ahead of myself, which is a really dangerous habit to get into, because if you start thrusting straight from your ripostes, you can end up not getting your tip online in time and essentially cutting at your opponent, which you're not going to do much damage with a thrusty weapon. All right, so that's 6. So let's look at septime. So starting from medium guard, to get to the position, I just want to draw a little circle with my tip and bring my hand over, palm up, sorry. So this angle, my palm is facing upwards this way, and my hand is in this angle. A little circle, bang. Septime is kind of cool because the parry, it's very, very natural to quickly flick your tip up and come on guard. So you can get a very nice parry riposte, come on guard very quick for a quick riposte and snap. So for septime, parry septime, guard of septime, thrust and back to guard. Parry septime, guard of septime, thrust and back to guard. Parry septime, guard of septime, thrust and back to guard. Parry septime, guard of septime, thrust and back to guard. Parry septime, guard of septime, thrust and back to guard. Parry septime, guard of septime, thrust and back to guard. And parry septime, guard of septime, thrust and back to guard. All right, now to show you that from the side. Parry septime, guard of septime, thrust and back to guard. Parry septime, guard of septime, thrust and back to guard. Parry septime, guard of septime, thrust and back to guard. parry of set two, guard set two, thrust, and back to guard. Right. So one of the reasons why you have multiple parries for the same lines, you'll notice that nearly every line of attack has 2 parries for it, is you don't want to be using the same parry consistently to defend, because that can make you quite predictable. And there's a lot of ways around parries. Basically, the way Chapman sort of approaches foil, which I think is also very, very good mentality to bring across to dueling sword, épée, is that you form engagement using the hand positions where you basically parry. So you just jerk up to a parry position if your opponent does something along that line, which then forces them to change lines before they attack, which gives you a little bit of breathing room to then react. So, you know, he sort of, the way he does parries is almost preemptive. You know, you come on guard in position to force your opponent to change, and then you do a thing where you might, you know, move to a different position with a simple parry just to parry, or you might disengage. You might do something else as a way of basically, you know, you have a plan going on how you're going to defend yourself against what is a very, very fast and nimble weapon. Let's look at the final parry, which is octave. So I want to go to octave. I want to circle and come back. You'll notice this is a theme. I don't want to just try and drop straight there. I want to circle and come back, because that guarantees I'm going to pick up my opponent's sword. My hand is held at this angle, palm facing up this way, yeah, and my tip down, covering the low outside line. And come to the guard of octave, thrust, and back to guard. So parry of octave, guard of octave, thrust, and back to guard. Parry of octave, guard of octave, thrust, and back to guard. Parry of octave, guard of octave, thrust, and back to guard. Parry of octave, guard of octave, thrust, and back to guard. Parry of octave, guard of octave, thrust, and back to guard. Parry of octave, guard of octave, thrust, and back to guard. And just to show you that from the side, and guard, parry of octave, guard of octave, thrust, and back to guard. Parry of octave, guard of octave, thrust, and back to guard. Parry of octave, guard of octave, thrust, and back to guard. And parry of octave, guard of octave, thrust, and back to guard. Right, so those are the 8 hand positions. I'm going to constantly reference what they are just to help you remember them, because it does. I know it took me a while, so I assume it takes everyone else a while, but there's probably people out there who are like, oh yes, no, I know exactly what those are, and remember them after that. So before we move on, are there any questions? Right, looks like no. Or do we might just call recording anyway.